Casey entered the room and looked around. It was clear there wasn't much to do. Change the linens, wipe the surfaces, and remove the coffee cup from the table. Then, as per regulation, she would go to clean the bathroom. An elderly man, well-groomed, intelligent, and very wealthy, had lived here for 2 days. At first sight, Casey realised that this gentleman wasn't an ordinary person. Over her years working at the hotel, she'd learned to read people. Men like Mr. Riley didn't cause problems for maids. They were neat, polite, and clean. Cleaning up after them was a couple of trifles, and later the woman had been told that he was a big businessman, the owner of a chain of restaurants. Casey approached the bedside table. It wasn't uncommon for such clients to leave tips, often generous ones. Sure enough, next to the lamp, with its green shade, lay a thin wad of bills. Casey counted them and smiled. Perfect! This would cover the children's uniforms. September was just around the corner, and it was time to prepare for school. She mentally thanked the pleasant guest and wished him good fortune. Returning to her cleaning, Casey encountered an unexpected surprise while changing the bed linen. As she lifted the pillow, she discovered a locket underneath. It was simple, made of cheap metal, clearly an inexpensive old piece. This didn't fit the image of the respectable elderly businessman. Mr. Riley wore an expensive watch and a suit from a famous designer, obviously tailored. And here was this 5-cent medallion. How odd. Casey picked up the unusual item. The case was bent in several places, but the locket itself was clean, free of rust or scratches. It had been well cared for, apparently holding great value to Mr. Riley. Bringing it closer, Casey noticed it could be opened. Curiosity got the better of her. She lifted the lid, and an old black-and-white photograph appeared before her amazed eyes. It showed a laughing girl with strong dark eyes, a braid wrapped around her head in an old-fashioned style, and a round mole above her lip. Casey stared in astonishment, touching the mole above her own lip. She had inherited it from her grandmother Agatha. In fact, everyone said Casey resembled her greatly, and now she was looking at a picture of her grandmother, taken when Agatha was very young. There was no doubt about it. Casey even knew which photograph this image had been cut from. She'd seen it many times in an old family album. Grandmother had been standing on a riverbank among weeping willows, the sun shining brightly. She was smiling. Agatha had told Casey that photographers rarely visited their village. It was a significant event, so Agatha had dressed up carefully before posing. On that very day, she'd borrowed a beautiful dress from a friend and even applied light makeup. Casey kept gazing at her grandmother's laughing face. Agatha had passed away long ago, when Casey was still a teenager. The granddaughter had struggled with the loss of her closest and dearest person. Casey had loved her granny more than her own mother. In fact, it was her grandmother who had raised her while her mother tried to sort out her personal life. The grandmother's cosy village house often welcomed grandchildren, Casey's cousins. Grandmother loved and welcomed everyone, giving her grandchildren warmth and comfort, enveloping them in care as soft as a blanket. Even her voice was velvety and healing. It had been difficult for Casey after her beloved grandmother's death, but she had endured and adapted. Agatha had always told her granddaughter that she was strong and brave, that she would succeed. Though things hadn't worked out as well as she might have hoped, but Casey wasn't on the streets and could support her children adequately. The woman looked at the locket in her palm, snapped the lid shut and pondered. What was this? How had a portrait of her grandmother Agatha come in a locket belonging to a rich businessman? There was clearly some connection between Mr. Riley and Grandma Agatha. It couldn't be coincidence that the man carried her picture. Maybe he collected retro items? and Agatha's picture had simply caught his eye. He might be a descendant of that photographer, and yet Casey's inner voice suggested otherwise. Mr. Riley and Grandmother Agatha must have known each other, perhaps even been close. Something connected them. Casey knew she had to find out what it was. The woman continued cleaning. The medallion was now in the pocket of her uniform apron. Regulations required her to give everything found in the rooms to the manager, who would then contact the former guests. They would agree on how to return the lost items to the owner. But this time, Casey decided to do something different. She would look for Mr. Riley. She needed to talk to him, to understand why he carried a picture of her grandmother. Everything connected with her granny was a valuable part of Casey's life. She missed her. It was as if a message from a loved one had arrived. Casey would find out everything before the summer, before school started. She would have to go to the capital, a whole day's journey, 3 hours one way by train, and even in the capital, it was uncertain how long she would stay. She might even have to stay overnight. But that was okay, the kids would manage. Molly, at 14, was quite a grown-up young lady. Andy, a year younger, was a responsible and serious kid. They'd manage with 6-year-old Becky. It wasn't their first time. Their mother was always at work to provide for the children. The older ones understood perfectly well and didn't mind taking on some of her household duties. Her kids were good. Sometimes she couldn't believe that she could bring them up like that. Still, Casey was worried about their future. She dreamed that Molly, Andy, and Becky would grow up, get an education, and become successful people. But she realized that much depended on her. Cleaning the room, she found herself thinking about her life. She began to remember the past. Perhaps it was because of the unexpected encounter with Grandmother Agatha's image. Her hands were working, but her thoughts were far away. Casey was the product of a fleeting casual affair. Her mother was barely 18 at the time. No education, no prospects, no special plans for life. Daphne was always like that. Flighty, in love, too carefree. In school she interrupted her studies 2 or 3 times, not at all because of lack of intelligence. Daphne simply preferred going out and dating to studying. It seemed silly and boring to her when there was so much fun and excitement around. She dated, most often guys much older than herself. She wasn't interested in boys her own age, as she put it. Well, at least because these older suitors already worked and could give her gifts. Agatha's head was spinning. She had raised her children alone. Her husband had died, drowning while saving a woman in the lake, when his youngest son was barely a month old. Agatha was left alone with 5 children, 4 sons and the daughter Daphne. Of course, the widow had to start working early, essentially doing the work of 2. How else could she feed such a brood? Agatha was attractive, but she refused all suitors. She was too busy with her children. The boys grew up well, all like their father. They helped their mother in the household, studied well, and engaged in sports. But Agatha didn't understand what was happening to her beloved Daphne. She had always been lazy and capricious, but in her teenage years it was as if a demon possessed her. There began the absences from school and the dating. The girl responded to her mother's exhortations with rudeness. Neighbours advised Agatha to be stricter, saying the girl had gone wild. Agatha tried, but it didn't work out. Once, after a school meeting, she came home upset and devastated. She grabbed a twig, raised it over the frightened Daphne, but then lowered her hand. Agatha seemed to have raised all the children the same way, but it turned out like this. The boys caused no problems, but her daughter made up for all of them. Eventually, Agatha came to terms with it. She decided that Daphne would calm down with age, like her husband's sister. She had been the same. and then she married and became an exemplary wife and mother. After graduating from school, Daphne expressed her desire to go to the city. "Why?" Agatha asked, surprised. "You have bad grades. They won't take you anywhere. You won't pass exams." "Who needs this studying? I'll earn money. Do you know how much money there is in the city?" "And where will you work? What can you do?" "I'll find something. There are lots of opportunities there. I know for a fact. People have told me." "I won't let you go." Agatha was stubborn. Her heart told her that her daughter would be lost in the city. There were so many dangers there, and Daphne, she had her head in the clouds. "How will you stop me?" Her daughter grinned. "I turned 18 last week. I'll go where I want. I'm independent now. Get it?" True, this independent one had to be given money for the first time. It was all of Agatha's savings, but she couldn't let her daughter go to the city without a penny. "Mum, why did you give it to her?" lamented the eldest son when he found out. "Maybe if she'd been without money, she would have realised she wasn't capable of anything, that she should study, and would have returned." The other sons took offence that all the money went to the flighty Daphne, instead of being divided equally among them all. But Agatha was sure she had done the right thing. What kind of living and work could Daphne find without money? Thus, Daphne moved to the city. For almost a year, there was no word about her. Neighbourhood children who studied or worked in the city sometimes brought some news. It seemed that Daphne was living with a man. She didn't work, maintained a household. Agatha wondered. Daphne and a household? How is that possible? But Agatha quietly hoped that her wild daughter had indeed calmed down, that now everything would be all right in her life. However, her mother's hopes were not destined to come true. One rainy fall evening, Daphne appeared on the doorstep of her home. Her brothers had already left, some to study, some to work. Agatha was home alone. Seeing her daughter, the woman gasped. Beautiful Daphne had turned into a haggard creature. Her face bore an unhealthy skin tone, characteristic of people who abuse alcohol. Most surprisingly, in her hands, Daphne held a baby, in a faded, apparently previous used orange blanket. "Meet your granddaughter," Daphne said in a husky voice. "Casey, named after her daddy, who doesn't give a damn about her." Agatha nearly fell over from shock. She hadn't realised she was a grandmother again. Now she had 3 grandchildren, 2 from her eldest son and 1 from her daughter. The woman let her daughter and the child into the house. It turned out that Daphne had lived for a long time with a man much older than herself. He was from another city, had quarrelled with his family, left and started a new life. He met Daphne and they got together, based on their love for the same lifestyle, partying and crowds of friends in the house. The man worked at a construction site doing odd jobs. They lived on his irregular but quite decent earnings. He was a handyman, the type in demand everywhere. If he hadn't been drinking, he'd have been worth a lot. Then Daphne realised she was expecting a child. Her boyfriend wasn't happy at first, but quickly realised children meant child benefits, and stopped pushing his partner to get an abortion. By the time Daphne had the baby, much had changed. The man somehow reconciled with his legal wife and left for his homeland, leaving Daphne alone with her problems. After the maternity hospital, she lived for a while in their rented apartment. It was paid until the end of the month. Then she went back to her mother's house. Where else could she go? Agatha took pity on her wayward daughter, assuring her that everything would be all right. "I'm with you. We'll manage together. We'll raise the girl." "Thank you, Mum." Agatha was even glad that everything turned out this way. She thought that now Daphne would wise up. Children, they're good for growing up. But as soon as she came to her senses, Daphne left for the city again, leaving her daughter with her mother. Agatha didn't see any child support. The negligent mother received it in the city and spent it on herself. It was hard for Agatha to raise little Casey, but she didn't complain. The child was like a ray of light, a source of happiness and energy. Daphne appeared occasionally when money ran out, or when she hadn't a beau and needed a place to stay. She had no warm feelings for Casey. Neighbours suggested to Agatha that she deprive her daughter of parental rights, so that there would be more benefits and everyone would live more peacefully. But Agatha didn't do it. She felt sorry for Daphne, and there was still hope in her heart that she would come to her senses. But it didn't work out. Daphne eventually disappeared. They searched for her for a long time, finally finding her in another region, in a penal colony, where she had been sent for theft. She never left that place, dying within its cold walls from diseases acquired over years of a troubled life. Agatha worried, cried, and blamed herself, believing she had missed something in raising her only, dearly loved daughter. But Casey, she felt nothing when she heard the news. Nothing at all. Her mother was a stranger to her, unfamiliar, almost even unpleasant. And when her grandmother passed away, it was like the world turned upside down. She was still young then, barely 16, and was taken into the family of her older uncle. His wife didn't like her niece. She tried not to show it, but Casey felt and understood everything. The uncle himself treated the girl coolly enough. The brothers didn't like their sister Daphne because of how much trouble she caused the family. Apparently, they transferred this feeling to her daughter Casey. After Agatha's, the girl felt lonely and abandoned. Although she had relatives, Casey knew she shouldn't rely on them. She could only rely on herself. Casey, remembering her grandmother Agatha's precepts, planned to study and even enrolled to the college after graduation. Her grades were good. The girl had always been characterized by diligence and perseverance. She was given a dormitory, and the girl happily moved out from her relatives. It wasn't pleasant to feel redundant all the time. At first, the girl devoted herself to her studies, and then she met Greg. He was a young man, handsome and blue-eyed. He came to the college where Casey studied to visit a friend, saw the young girl, and smiled at her. A light, casual conversation ensued. Casey melted under his gaze. She hadn't felt so warm and good at heart for a long time. It seemed that here he was, a man who cared about her. Greg asked her on a date, and she agreed with pleasure. Next to him, the girl felt protected. She wanted to hope that her loneliness was over, that there was a man ready to take care of her. Greg seemed just like that, sensitive and reliable. After the date, he invited her to his room. The man was staying at a hotel. Casey agreed without a second thought. Already later, she realized what was what, but she did not resist him. What difference does it make? Anyway, they will be together now. But Casey was wrong. Greg disappeared as suddenly as he appeared. From the very friend he had visited, Casey learned that Greg had long been married, had 3 children, worked as a trucker. In general, Casey became one of his many one-night stands. It was frustrating, but what could she do now? Casey experienced disappointment, made important conclusions for herself, and lived quietly until she realized she was expecting a child. Casey rushed to the clinic. She didn't know what to do herself, so the doctor's words that she had missed the term for termination of pregnancy even pleased the girl. At least now she wouldn't have to make a choice. The child would be born. Of course, the young student faced many problems. How to study, where to live, what to live on. Amid worries and concerns, Casey missed the exam session and was expelled. Well, anyway, she couldn't study with a child in her arms. she had to return to the village, to her grandmother's old house, which was now hers. Many years ago, after her daughter's death, Agatha had signed the house over to her granddaughter, which again displeased her sons. "It's nothing. They're successful and established. They're men, after all. They won't be lost. But Casey has no one except me. She definitely needs her own corner, so she'll feel more confident in life," Agatha explained to the neighbours, and Casey overheard everything. Now the young woman was glad that she truly had a place to go. True, during the girl's time living first at her uncle's, then in the dormitory, the house had fallen into a state barely suitable for habitation. Nobody had taken care of it, but Casey wasn't afraid of that then. She had a roof over her head, and that was enough. With her own strength, as best she could, Casey made it cosy. And then Molly was born. This event turned Casey's whole world upside down again. She looked at the tiny baby girl, filled with tenderness and warmth, and realized, for the sake of this tiny bundle, she would move mountains. Now her own mother's actions bewildered Casey even more. How could one voluntarily give up their own child, preferring unfamiliar, unpleasant men to a daughter? And while Casey strived to be an exemplary mother, she began to receive an allowance for the child. It became easier financially. Casey learned to save money, stock up on food, and buy things on sale. The young mother managed frugally, which made her feel proud and strong. The plan was to raise Molly until she could go to kindergarten, and then Casey would work at the local post office, or library, or shop. Maybe she'd be able to finish her studies in time, because it was necessary to settle down in this life somehow. But the young mother's plans were not destined to come true. One day, Stapleton West came to the village. Casey knew him. He was the neighbour's son, 5 years older than her. He had finished his studies, gone to the capital, and entered a university there. It was said that he had been hired by some big company. Stapleton came for his sick mother, deciding to take her to the city. The treatment there was better, and life in general more interesting. Casey had once been in love with him, as had a good half of the girls in their village, so Casey, of course, didn't mind when he came to chat a little. That evening, Stapleton was slightly drunk, having apparently met his friends beforehand. "So that's how your life turned out," the young man said, shaking his head, and Casey at this moment admired his intelligent grey eyes. "Too bad. You were such a smart and beautiful girl. I thought a different future awaited you." "Maybe it still does." "Maybe," Stapleton said, not too confidently. Then he began to talk about himself, about his life in the city. To the villagers, Stapleton seemed the epitome of success and luck. It turned out that everything wasn't so simple. Stapleton was deeply unhappy inside. Career achievements weren't easy. He had to adjust to others, sometimes stepping on his own principles, fawning before those in power. In the end, Stapleton and Casey woke up in each other's arms. In the morning, Stapleton was horrified, apologized, and hurried to leave Casey's house. It was painful for her to see and realize all this. She had felt a kinship of souls with this man the night before. They seemed to understand each other very well. She wanted to believe that this was the beginning of something big, beautiful, and real. Soon after Stapleton's departure, Casey realized she was pregnant again. She knew she couldn't get rid of the child because there was Molly, small, sweet, alive, and inside her was the same baby. She couldn't hurt him. She just couldn't. Nothing was required of Stapleton. Casey didn't want to look for him from the beginning. Even if she did find him, he wouldn't be happy to hear the news. No, Casey didn't want to settle things. She decided that she could manage on her own. Andy was born. With 2 babies in her arms and no money, it was hard for Casey, of course. But the children pleased her, gave her strength and served as motivation. No matter how difficult it was, Casey still felt happy. True, the neighbours joked, often comparing her to her mother, saying that a bad bird, a bad egg. It was offensive. Casey, unlike the woman who gave birth to her, didn't abandon her children. She loved them, raised them herself, and gave them every spare minute of her time. Molly and Andy grew up, pleasing their mother with excellent health. They were smart, clever, and nice. It was always fun together. The kids grew up and went to kindergarten. Casey went to work. Not at the post office or in the library, as she'd dreamed. There were no places there, but at the farm. The labour was hard, but the salary wasn't bad by village standards, and, importantly, regular. Casey didn't even think about returning to her studies. There simply wasn't enough time or energy. Meanwhile, her grandmother's house was constantly deteriorating. Everything in it required repair, the application of men's hands. Casey herself couldn't cope. One day she realised that it couldn't go on like this. They needed to move to the city and sell the house before it completely fell apart. That's what Casey did. With the proceeds, she rented an apartment in the city for a year and immediately got a job. She worked in cafes and restaurants as a kitchen assistant and cleaner, and even managed to work as a cashier. There was enough work for those who weren't afraid of labour. The children went to kindergarten. Casey earned money, even managed to save a little for a rainy day. In general, the woman was quite satisfied with her life until the children went to school. But when school started, she had to spend more money. Books, school uniform, trips with their class, gadgets, fashionable clothes. All this required more financial investments. And Casey didn't earn that much. She was used to saving money, barely making ends meet, believing that she could cope with financial difficulties. Casey didn't want Andy and Molly to feel inferior among their classmates. But what could she do? She had to take an extra job. Cleaning ladies were needed everywhere. Tired and sleep-deprived, Casey became a shadow of herself. Sometimes such despair would come over her that it was hard to breathe. But she held on for the sake of her children, her son and daughter. She tried not to show them her fatigue or fear. At times, sad reflections overwhelmed Casey. She was only 26, yet she had already been through so much. With 2 children in her arms, she had never been in a serious relationship, something she was ashamed to admit. In the whole world, she had no one to help her, except for her uncles. But they had never loved her mother, so they had no feelings for their niece. She couldn't count on them, and it was terrifying to feel so alone and helpless. No matter how hard Casey fought or how much she worked, she still earned mere pennies, just enough to avoid homelessness and starvation, nothing more. At least Molly and Andy understood and didn't demand the impossible from their mother. On the contrary, they helped as much as they could, taking on household chores, cleaning, even cooking. Their mother was always at work. Casey came home exhausted, quickly finished some chores, wished Molly good night, and fell asleep before her head could touch the pillow. A few years later, a man came into her life. Dean was a little older than her, sullen, silent. Dean worked in an apartment repair firm, where Casey worked part-time as a cleaner 3 times a week. At first, she didn't notice him. Dean didn't stand out in any particular way, but then he helped her carry full buckets of water to the 4th floor and volunteered to wipe the windows under the ceiling. He could reach from the floor, while Casey would have to risk her health on a rickety stepladder. One day, Casey realised that this man cared about her, something no one had ever done before. The discovery struck her pleasantly. Casey looked at the silent Dean with new eyes and noticed his rather pleasant appearance. They started talking. It turned out that Dean used to live in a village. He had a wife there. Then his wife began to scold him for his meagre earnings, and one day she left him for another man. Dean was left all alone, broken and confused. He decided to move to the city to earn money. In his native village, everything reminded him of his past life and his wife's betrayal, and people looked at him with sympathy. Dean disliked these looks. In the city, he rented an apartment and got a job. Being handy, Dean made good money doing repairs. He worked for the firm and took on side jobs. He grew accustomed to his quiet and measured life. He even began to like it. And then there was Casey, a single woman who had to work so hard to provide for 2 children, abandoned and unsupported. At first he felt just pity for her. Then entirely different feelings emerged. Dean suddenly realized that he wanted to be close to this woman, to care for her and protect her from life's troubles. He wanted to become her rock, behind which she could feel cozy and calm. Casey listened to him and felt waves of happiness spreading through her body. Every word of Dean's was weighty and sincere. Of course, doubts flitted through her mind. What if he was lying? What if Dean was just like the others? What if he was just playing at love, only to disappear in the end? It was difficult to trust this man completely, but Casey decided to take a chance, and she didn't regret it. Dean moved in and immediately took on all the men's work, fixing plumbing problems, putting up the shelves in the bathroom, and finally hanging the curtain rods correctly. The house immediately became cozy and beautiful. It turned out that Dean was not only a handyman, but also a wonderful cook. From mere leftovers in the fridge, he created mind-boggling dishes. With him, Casey practically forgot about financial problems. Dean earned quite well and spent generously, buying quality food, sweets and clothes for the children, and gifts for his wife. Andy and Molly immediately accepted and loved him, and he treated the children very warmly. Dean often took them for walks, to the movies, or to the amusement park. He helped them with their lessons, played with them, and had long conversations with them on various topics. Casey could hardly believe her happiness. Her life became brighter, happier, fuller. She no longer had to work herself to death at several jobs. There was no need for it now. She had energy for life, for joy, for rest, the most important thing. Casey was no longer alone. She had a man she loved and who loved her. She was now cared for, supported, protected, and defended. It felt incredible. A couple of years of happy life flew by. Casey believed this was how it would always be. So the news of another pregnancy made her happy, and Dean was overjoyed. He began to make plans for their own place. Rent was inexpensive for Dean, but he wanted stability. After all, 3 children were a big responsibility. So he began to take on extra jobs, working at construction sites, unloading rail cars and trucks, anything to save an extra penny. And then it happened. Something Casey still couldn't remember without tears. Dean was hit by a truck at a construction site. Due to fatigue and overwork, he violated safety regulations. Casey couldn't believe that the man she loved was gone. She was alone again, facing this cruel and unforgiving world where such terrible things happen. She felt as if a concrete slab was pressing on her chest. The world became grey and lifeless, as if it weren't real. She didn't want to think about the future without Dean. It made her panic. During that difficult period, Casey dreamed that the world would collapse in reality, and then there would be nothing. But these were dangerous thoughts. The woman understood. She had to live. She had to hold on for the sake of her children, who were also struggling to bear the loss of a loved one. And she also had Dean's baby living under her heart. He needed to be born healthy and strong. Casey took herself in hand for the sake of the children and continued the fight. Fortunately, Dean had kept their savings at home in a private place rather than in the bank. Otherwise, Casey wouldn't have been able to access the account. She and Dean had never had time to get married. They were only planning to. Soon the woman gave birth to little Becky, and while she was just a baby, the family barely survived. They stretched their modest savings until the baby went to kindergarten and Casey went to work. Fortunately, the little girl was rarely sick, so her mother could work without taking sick leave. Then Casey received an offer for her dream job. One of the tenants in the building where Casey mopped floors in the mornings suggested she interviewed with the local hotel director. "You're slender, cute, and used to hard work. It's noticeable. Most importantly, you know how to smile and communicate with people. We need such people in our hotel. There's a maid position vacant right now. Try it. It's better than cleaning dirty entrances." And Casey tried it. She didn't believe she'd succeed, but she did. She was hired at the hotel. The work wasn't taxing, quiet, even pleasant. The salary was more than decent, plus tips, sometimes very generous. Life became much easier. Casey still missed Dean, his care, his voice, his scent. She was still a single mother of 3 children, and yet life began to regain its colour. Casey even managed to take the children to the sea one day. It was the first time both the children and she had been to the coast. The sea looked fantastic. They were all still impressed and dreamed of repeating the trip some day. However, it was still hard for Casey to accept that she was alone again. She worried, if something happened to her, where would the children go? It was unlikely that her uncles would take them, as they didn't even know the children existed. They had long since lost touch, becoming complete strangers. Casey often remembered her grandmother Agatha and imagined what the world would be like if she was still alive. Probably the grandmother would live with them, read bedtime stories to the children, bake pancakes for her great-grandchildren, call Casey her sweet girl, and hug her. She remained the most significant figure for Casey. That's why her photograph, found in an antique locket under the pillow of a wealthy businessman, so excited the woman. Casey couldn't wait. She had to find out as quickly as possible what it meant. Finding information about Mr. Riley in the digital age took only 5 minutes. Casey learned that he was alive and working in the capital. She found the address of the main office, learned its working hours, and the next morning she was on a train, watching the passing scenery. At work, Casey took a day off at her own expense and gave her children instructions for the whole day. She didn't worry about the older ones. They could manage cooking, cleaning the house, taking a walk, and picking up Becky from kindergarten in the evening. Everything would be all right with them. Casey twirled the locket in her fingers, looking at it, occasionally opening the lid and admiring her grandmother's photograph. Would Mr. Riley accept it? He might get angry. He might think she stole it. What did he have to do with her granny? Casey was worried and anxious, but she knew she had to find Mr. Riley. Casey arrived at Mr. Riley's office in the afternoon. She entered and answered the receptionist's question about her destination. To her surprise, she wasn't stopped. The receptionist, a polite, smiling girl, only told her which office the chief was in. To Casey's luck, it was a time when anyone could come to Mr. Riley to discuss his restaurants, complain, offer suggestions, or express gratitude. Mr. Riley believed it was important to keep his finger on the pulse to stay on top. He always listened carefully to the opinions of customers, employers, and partners. Casey entered Mr. Riley's office unhindered. She had expected something more pompous and luxurious, given that he was a wealthy man, but he seemed to prefer simplicity and ergonomics. Casey entered and said hello. Mr. Riley cordially invited her to sit in the chair opposite his desk. His open look and sincere smile helped Casey gather herself. The excitement had dissipated, but she still didn't know where to begin. All the prepared phrases suddenly fled her mind. "Do you have a question for me? Or perhaps a suggestion?" Mr. Riley prompted. "Don't be shy. You can say whatever you want. I welcome honesty. I respect the truth, even if it's not always pleasant. So you can tell me whatever is on your mind. Didn't like the service in the restaurant? Or maybe something was wrong with the cuisine?" "No," Casey shook her head. I'm here to see you about something else entirely." With those words, she pulled a locket out of her purse. "I'm the maid from the hotel where you stayed. I found this in your room." Mr. Riley's face changed, his eyebrows raised in surprise, and a light of joy lit up in his eyes. "So you found it!" he exclaimed, clearly delighted. "And I was worried, thinking for some reason I'd lost it at the station. I was sure I had slipped the locket into my pocket before I left the hotel, as I always do." "You left it under your pillow." "Old age is no joy," joked Mr. Riley. Casey handed the medallion to the owner, who hurriedly took it in his hands, stroked the lid with his thumb. It was obvious that the thing was dear to him. "Did you come here specifically to give it to me?" The man spoke thoughtfully, scrutinizing Casey sitting in front of him. "But why? You could have handed it to the administrator. They would have called me, and I would have sent someone. Why go to all that trouble?" "The thing is, my grandmother is in the picture." Mr. Riley shrugged. He was no longer smiling. His face took on its most serious expression. "What was your grandmother's name? The one in the picture?"
"Agatha."
"Agatha. I can't believe it." Mr. Riley looked shocked to the core. He glanced at the medallion, then at Casey, and red spots appeared on his cheeks.
"Tell me, please, how do you know my grandmother? And why do you carry her picture with you everywhere? You see, Grandma, she's my closest person. I have no one else, and never had. She raised me. It's important for me to know everything about her."
"I see. The thing is, your grandmother is probably the person closest to me too. I looked for her for a long time. Then I realized it was useless. And here you are. This won't be a short conversation. Perhaps some tea or coffee."
Casey shook her head. It wasn't tea she needed right now.
"All right." Mr. Riley began his story. "I was born in a remote village to alcoholic parents. From childhood, I knew neither love nor affection. I grew up like a weed, taking care of myself as best I could. The neighbours sometimes helped, feeding me when my parents went on benders for weeks. I didn't realise I lived in poverty, or that adults should love, protect and care for children. I thought everyone's life was like mine, so I didn't worry about my fate. Such suffering was alien to a small child. Agatha was then a very young woman. From the adults, I knew her father died at the war, and her mother died after the war. Her heart gave out. Agatha was kind and cheerful. She often treated me to candies, and sometimes called me Mowgli, ruffling my hair. It was pleasant. Then
There was a fire in the house where I lived with my parents. It happened during yet another party. I had grown accustomed to these endless gatherings. The adults quarrelled, laughed, talked, fought, kissed, fell asleep on the floor, while I played quietly in the attic, or slept there, wrapped in my grandfather's old coat. That night, I woke up struggling to breathe. I jumped up, coughing. It was pitch black, but not from the night. Something dark swirled around, stinging my eyes and irritating my lungs. Smoke. Even though I was only 7, I realized the house was on fire. Surely one of the adults had failed to extinguish a cigarette. My granny, when scolding my parents, often said they'd burn the house down one day. It seemed her prediction had come true. I was terrified. I opened the attic window, considering jumping, but the ground was too far. I'd break my neck. I didn't want to return to the smoke-filled room, but what choice did I have? There was no other way out. I groped my way down, bumping into scattered objects. Downstairs, something unimaginable was happening. Flames crackled and roared, quickly devouring wallpaper, curtains and furniture. The exit seemed impossibly distant. Things fell from the ceiling, billowing around me. I couldn't breathe. I'd never been so scared. I screamed, but no one was there. Where had everyone gone? Had they burned or fled, abandoning me? My head was ringing. I tried to inhale but couldn't. Everything spun, blending, and I fell into darkness. Before losing consciousness, I thought I was dying. So, I was astonished when I opened my eyes to see stars high in the sky. I could breathe easily, and the night's coolness was refreshing. Someone was carrying me. I turned my head and saw Agatha's worried, soot-stained face. She had pulled me from the fire. "You're alive," she said. "Thank God you're alive. I thought I was too late." That's when I noticed the others. People were running towards us from all directions. Someone wrapped me in a blanket. Another gave me water. I turned to see flames engulfing my house, bursting from the attic window I'd left moments ago. "Agatha, you pulled the boy from the fire," muttered one of the men. "We were afraid, but you did it. You're an incredible person." Agatha took me in. "The boy has nowhere to live now. He's alone. I'm alone. We'll be together," she said. Later I learned my parents had died in the fire. I was surprised, but not particularly upset. It was strange to realize they were gone. The fire had indeed been started by some drunken guests. Some of my parents' companions escaped. Others perished with them. The same fate would have awaited me. I lost consciousness from the smoke, but before managing to scream. And Agatha heard that scream. She, like others, had come to the fire, hoping to help any survivors. The flames raged inside, their glow visible through the windows. Black smoke billowed from every crevice. People tried to dissuade Agatha, even held her back, thinking it was hopeless. But she heard the child's cry and couldn't stay away. The brave girl rushed into the burning house, found me, and carried me out in her arms. The fire scorched her eyebrows and eyelashes, which didn't grow back for a long time. Scars remained on her palms from the burns she suffered while rescuing me. I loved Agatha's place. It was clean, and there was always food. She was cheerful and kind, read books to me, told me stories and cared for me. She arranged my first real birthday party, Mr. Riley recalled with a smile. She baked a cake and bought me a present, a soccer ball, as I remember. She invited the local children. That's when I started playing with other kids. Before that, they hadn't really accepted me. Agatha was very young, but she cared for me like an experienced mother. We lived in perfect harmony. She taught me so much. It must have been challenging for her. I was completely wild, like Mowgli. Agatha taught me how to use cutlery, make my bed, and communicate with people. She taught me letters and then reading. Most importantly, she loved me dearly, hugged me, and often said kind words. I thawed with her, transforming from a wild animal into a human being. I thought it would always be like that. Agatha decided to adopt me and drew up all the necessary documents. It turned out to be more complicated than expected, requiring paperwork and visits to various institutions. Agatha left me with the neighbours and went to the city. She thought it would take a week, but it dragged on for a month. Knowing I would miss her, Agatha left me a locket before she departed. You see, I'll be with you. If you get lonely, open the lid and look at me. You can tell me all your worries and troubles. I'll hear them through the locket, I promise. So don't worry. I'll be far away, but still near you. And at that very time, my relatives appeared. My mother's cousin and her husband. They suddenly wanted to take me, but don't think she had any familial feelings, none of the sort. Later I discovered it was all about inheritance. My grandmother had died. My mother, and therefore I, was one of her heirs, and this woman took me into her custody to get her hands on my share. I must say, she succeeded. I was taken far away to a town on the other side of the country. I cried. I didn't want to leave my village or part with Agatha. She had become closer to me than my mother. She had saved my life, helped me become a normal person, and taught me everything with love and care. But no one asked for my opinion. The neighbours generally thought it was right. The boy should be with relatives, not with a strange young girl. Agatha herself is almost still a child. She needs to get married and have children of her own. You'll go to your relatives. That's right, that's fine, they said to me. On the journey I had a tantrum. The mother's cousin quickly stopped it with a ringing slap. Subsequently, she was not particularly gentle with me. They didn't like me, tolerated me barely because of the inheritance. It was cold and uncomfortable to live there. I tried not to be at home. At school I enrolled in all the additional lessons I could, just to spend less time with them. When I was 14, my loving foster mother sent me to a boarding school outside the city. After graduation I joined the army and became a driver. After my service, I never visited the family. To their undoubted joy, I rented a room and got a job at a dairy as a driver. The boss noticed me and my eagerness to work and helped me enter college. I was reluctant at first, but I couldn't go against his boss. Surprisingly, I became engaged and emerged as the top student in my course. Then everything developed organically. After graduation, I was invited to work as a manager in a famous restaurant. There I gained experience. Gradually, a plan to open my own cafe took shape. I saved money for a down payment and started my own business. It was challenging, ups and downs, learning from mistakes, hard work. From morning until night, I delved into the smallest details, trying to understand and control everything. As a result, I managed to create a chain of restaurants with an excellent reputation. Now I had everything: money, my favourite business, power and strength. I tried to find Agatha. I wanted to see her, thank her, and look again into the kind eyes of the person who had given me a second life. I wanted to tell her about myself. I knew that Agatha was also interested in my fate. But many years had passed. The village where I was born and grew up no longer existed. It was impossible to find Agatha because I, as it turned out, knew almost nothing about her. Only her name and approximate age. Even hired detectives were unable to accomplish the task. That locket. It's been my talisman all these years. It gave me strength, I can't explain it. I did talk to Agatha when I got older, and I realised that she couldn't really hear me. It's a habit, just the way it is. I had complained to her about my foster mother, about the mean teachers, and, it did make things easier. A kind of psychotherapy. I got married. I had 2 sons. If a girl had been born, I would have named her after Agatha. I gradually resigned myself to the fact that I would never find traces of the girl who had saved my life. And now you appeared with the medallion. It is unbelievable, incredible that it was her granddaughter who found Agatha's last gift to me. Is she still— Mr. Riley hesitated to ask the most important question of all. Casey realised and shook her head. She wished she could make him happy, but Agatha hadn't been alive for many years. Well, of course she must have been quite old by now, Mr. Riley said, shaking his head sadly. But you know what? This isn't all accidental. Agatha brought you to me on purpose. I know for a fact it's a miracle that we found each other, and now we shall never be lost. I'll introduce you to my family. They know about Agatha and will be pleased. They stood in the old village cemetery, Mr. Riley and Casey. The man gazed at the gravestone, at Agatha's portrait, who looked at visitors with a sad, affectionate smile. In his hands was a bouquet of roses. Mr. Riley turned out to be a simple and very pleasant man. He and Casey had grown close in the month since their acquaintance. The man's family warmly accepted Casey and her children. Now they were kindred people, close to each other, and all thanks to Agatha, her huge heart and kindness. Casey suddenly realised that Mr. Riley wanted to be alone. She stepped aside, pretending to look for the grave of one of her relatives. The woman saw Mr. Riley saying something quietly. Probably he had a lot to say to Agatha. Later, Mr. Riley and his grandchildren, along with Casey and her children, will go to the movies and spend a warm family evening together. Yes, now Casey had a whole family, and that was happiness.